WFTW. I'm Andy, sitting in here at the Walsh this morning. If you want to be a part of the program, feel free to call in at 664-1260. Again, that number is 664-1260. We definitely want to hear from you. And also joining us is Sheriff Larry Ashley as well.
Good morning.
Good morning, Sheriff. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing better than I deserve, but much busier than I care to be.
Well, Michelle was here last week with us, and we had her caller call in, and obviously ever since before Christmas, with the shooting in Newtown, Connecticut at Sandy Hook Elementary, it's been an issue. Now we've talked many times about the benefits in our high schools and middle schools of resource officers. How long has that program been in existence now?
I think it's been with us since 1995, maybe 1994.
And, people were somewhat, skeptical. There were a few skeptics out there. Most of the community thought, hey, that'd be a pretty good, thing to do with the high school kids, especially sometimes with other issues about bullying and other things. We've seen other high schools in urban areas, like right next to my hometown in Paterson, New Jersey, where they actually had metal detectors, and they would lock the doors, chain the doors closed. But we went to the idea of the resource officer. Talk about what benefit that provides for the schools from your perspective as a sheriff.
Well, Ken, I think we've got to first have a logical discussion on this subject versus an emotional one. And it is an emotional subject when you have 20 babies, between the ages of 5 and 10 just murdered, along with 6 teachers and administrators. But the logical thing is that if we look at what we actually use our resources for, our law enforcement resources for, and we spend millions of dollars at the airport making sure our airports are secure with screeners and with TSA and with law enforcement, and we spend millions of dollars a year making sure our courthouses are secure for judges and adults and the like. We spend millions of dollars a year making sure our hospitals are secure, and especially our emergency rooms. And when we look at what we spend our money, our resources on, what is the most important thing that we should be protecting? And, prior to, Columbine, and prior to the Connecticut and Virginia Tech and the Pearl, Mississippi, and the list just goes on and on and on. It's like, this was a wake-up call, and it made world news. It's a wake-up call that there's a lot of active shooters. There's a lot of active shootings in our schools. And so are our kids at risk? I certainly believe so. That every time we have a school, whether it's elementary school or middle school or high school, we are having a public event. We're inviting the public into an area, and that's parents and custodians and children and staff members, and whatever that they're bringing in from society. There's a criminal element to our society. And so how do we filter that out of that public event? If I were to walk on, God forbid, somebody were to walk onto an elementary campus with a gun, who confronts that individual? Do we have our armed principal go out there and disarm that individual and say, you can't be here? Or do we have a teacher go out there and disarm them and say, hey, you can't be on?
Cafeteria lady with a frying pan.
Yeah, I mean, how do we respond to an armed subject that walks onto our campus for whatever reason, that gets angry while they're there? And so my thing is, if I've got to use resources and I've got a finite amount of resources, what do I protect first? Who do I serve, and who do I protect first with the resources we have? And I can't, I'll certainly debate anybody that thinks that we shouldn't protect our children and have the ability to confront and prevent the kind of violence we saw in Connecticut and elsewhere in our country.
Well, I did see either one politician or commentator, I can't remember who, made the statement. He says, we want to protect our money, so we have armed guards in our banks.
Yes.
Why do you do that? Where do you have the armed guards? It's things that you want to protect. And then he asked the hypothetical question, does that mean that if you don't want officers in the schools, that we don't think the kids are important enough to protect them?
And that's the thing, and we look at both things. We look at, is there a threat level, and what it is that we're protecting. Of course, there's a threat that people are going to come and steal our money. Well, I believe there's a threat that there are those out there that would do our children harm, and maybe not intentional like in Connecticut, but because they've lost control over a custody issue, or because you've got a domestic violence issue that goes into the school, or or any number of things that could or might happen at our schools. But that, I've been asked a lot about, well, what is their job duties? Are they just going to stand around and guard? And that's like the same analogy that you used is, what do people that are protecting money do? Do they just stand around and guard the money? Of course, there's a lot more that they can do, and it's about the physical campus makeup and assessing those and what that entails. And it also has to do with partnering with DJJ and our Department of Children and Family Services, Department of Juvenile Justice, and our teachers. That we just prevented at one of our elementary schools this past week. We had a father who was trying to check his son out of school, his elementary school son. Well, the law enforcement officer knew that he had a domestic violence injunction, that he had no contact with the mother or the children. Well, the school didn't know that, and so his checking that child out was prevented by that officer being there. And it's just those type of things. The intelligence side of that is who are the kids in our school? What's going on at home? Are there domestic violence issues? Are there drug issues? Are there arrest issues? Or other things that are going on that may come into the school as a result of having this child here? It's one of those things that unless they defund the entire sheriff's office, the first 40 positions that we'll have funded will be our school resource officer.
Okay, and that's really the community when you're talking about, well, who's going to pay the cost, or should we incur that cost? What do you expect from law enforcement? It gets down to a very basic discussion of, all right, you want law enforcement, what are your priorities going to be, right?
And that's the basic debate here is having our school resource officers more important than enforcing our traffic laws. So I took people off of the traffic unit. Our school, elementary school, is more important than our street crimes unit that goes out there and buys drugs from these individuals that are selling curbside, open market drug sales. Is it more important than a civil process? So I took a couple out of there. So your subpoenas may get there in 3 weeks instead of 2 weeks, or your writ of replevin, or whatever the other court document that those civil process guys are out there serving. Or it may be that, and that includes eviction notices or eviction process. And it may be that it takes you an hour to get into the courthouse versus, 10 minutes because we've only got 2 screeners instead of 5. Those kind of things that you're trading off. And we may not have any beach patrol units, and we may not have any marine patrol units, because those aren't as important as protecting our elementary school kids. And
So
yes,
it boils down to the priorities that you have to set for the challenges that you face as a
yes,
sheriff.
and that's the whole point is, and when I stop doing funeral escorts because I don't have the manpower, and when I stop doing parades because I don't have the manpower, then it's up to the public to tell me, yes, we want those services, or no, we don't want those services. I'll argue with it that we're already undermanned as it is, with 1.3 officers per 1,000 citizens, and we've cut $6 million from our budget in the last 4 years, over 20% of our budget, or right out 20% of our budget. So you look at what we do per capita at $143 per capita versus the average of $317 per capita, and we already are doing it better than anybody else. And I'm just asking for a little help from our commissioners and from the school board. The school board, I certainly commend them for showing the courage they did.
So how many officers have actually been shifted into the elementary schools since Christmas time?
26.
All right, and so those people are now, that's their full-time job.
That's their full-time job.
So you've taken 26 people off other duties in the sheriff's office, and when they talk about how much the county is going to have to contribute, is that to replace the folks whose positions are now unfilled over in those other areas of the sheriff's department?
There's 2 sides of this. So there's the front end is what's a stopgap to get us to the end of this year. So we've already reallocated resources. They're there. We're trying to say, hey, will you support us in backfilling these positions? And so the school board is getting a service now that they weren't getting before. So they've paid their half to get us to the end of the year. And we're asking the county commission, I've got $300,000 where the sheriff's office does in federally seized funds that we can use one time only according to our federal equitable sharing agreement. We can use one time only for salaries for new positions. That gets us through the end of this. And I'm asking the county commissioners as a stopgap measure to add the other 265,000 to get us through the rest of this year, so I can backfill those positions. And I may not even need it. I may not be able to fill those 26 positions before the end of the school year.
Okay.
But the long-term funding, where we have sustainable revenue source to sustain this program, will come from, the Senate Education Committee is meeting today on safe school funding. So we're going to need help from the state. We're going to need help from the school board. We're going to need help from the county commission. And I heard it said by one of the commissioners, well, this is a school district responsibility. This is not a county commission responsibility. And I totally disagree. If you look at the statute says the sheriff will enforce the laws. It doesn't say the school principal. It doesn't say the school superintendent. It doesn't say the school board. So if it got right down to it, that it is the Board of County Commissioners, it is the sheriff's responsibility to fund law enforcement in Okaloosa County, and as well as it is in the rest of the counties in
And
Florida.
as far as enforcing the law or providing protection, it's a matter of whether or not that means it's a deputy patrolling a rural road in North Okaloosa County, or having that person in the school, in that rural school.
Yes, sir.
In case somebody shows up. All right, we're out of time, but Sheriff, thank you for coming in, talking about that. We'll be glad to have you back on to continue the discussion as the discussion in the public forums goes forward.
Thank you, Ken.
All right. We'll be back here on the way.